Oh, ponder the implications. I must use my expansive vocabulary at the lockers. Oh, ponder the implications. I must use my expansive vocabulary at the lockers.
Sentence when someone laughed. Not loud. Not enough for the teacher to stop it. Just enough to spread. A boy in the back leaned toward his friend. Why does she talk like that? The teacher hesitated. Too long. Lila felt heat rush to her face. She kept her eyes forward. If she stopped, they'd win. She finished her answer. Silence followed. Then a slow clap. Mocking. Another voice cut in, sharp and careless. Say it again. Maybe slower. Laughter spilled across the room like a crack in glass. Lila swallowed. Her heart pounded, but she didn't move. She had learned this part already. Don't react. Don't give them more. The teacher cleared his throat. Let's move on. Move on. Like nothing happened. At the side of the room, a flyer hung crooked on the wall. Inter-school debate team, tryouts today. Lila stared at it as the bell rang. Debate was about words. About speaking clearly. About being heard. Behind her, someone muttered, "She won't last 5 minutes." Lila tore the page from her notebook and folded it once. Then again. She didn't know it yet, but the moment she walked into that debate room, everything would change. And someone would make sure it hurt first. The debate room smelled like dry markers and old carpet. Lila stood near the door, notebook pressed flat against her chest, listening to voices bounce off the walls. Confident voices. Easy voices. The kind that never had to think before speaking. A girl laughed too loudly at something a judge said. Lila took a breath and stepped inside. Name? A man at the table asked without looking up. Lila Hassan. He glanced up, paused, then wrote it down. She Saturday. Her knee bounced once before she forced it still. Tryouts moved fast. One student after another stood, spoke, Saturday. Arguments about school uniforms. Social media. Curfews. Clean voices. Polished. Then it was her turn. Go ahead, the judge said. Lila stood. Her hands shook just a little. She opened her notebook but didn't look down. Good afternoon, she began. I believe school uniforms do not solve discipline problems. They only hide them. Her accent brushed the words. Light. Unapologetic. One judge tilted his head. She continued. Discipline comes from trust. From students feeling seen, not controlled. She finished strong. Clear. Calm. Silence. The woman on the panel smiled politely. The man on the left leaned back. The center judge folded his hands. You're articulate, he said slowly. Lila waited. But debate is about precision, he continued. Clarity. She nodded once. Do you think, he added, your way of speaking could be distracting in competition? The room felt smaller. My arguments are clear, Lila said. He smiled. Thin. I didn't say they weren't. I'm just asking how judges might receive them. Behind her, someone whispered, Here we go. Lila felt her chest tighten. With respect, she said, judges are trained to evaluate content, not accents. The judge's smile faded. Confidence, he said, writing something down. We'll see. She Saturday. Her palms were damp. When the list went up, she waited until the crowd thinned. She scanned the names once. Twice. Her name was last. Barely in. Relief hit her first. Then something colder. Ms. Rivera found her in the hallway. You okay? She asked. Lila nodded. Then shook her head. He said I was distracting. Ms. Rivera's jaw tightened. That wasn't feedback, she said quietly. That was a warning. Lila looked back at the room. Inside, the judges were still talking. One of them laughed. And Lila knew this wasn't just about debate anymore. The first practice felt different. Lila noticed it the moment she walked into the debate room. Chairs were arranged tighter. The judges' table had moved closer, like a line pulled inward. Closer meant louder. Closer meant nowhere to hide. Partners today, the center judge said, tapping his pen. We're testing adaptability. Names were called fast. Lila's wasn't. She stood there while pays formed. Friends leaned toward friends. Confident voices matched with confident voices. Finally, the judge looked up. Hassan, he said. You'll go solo. A few heads turned. Solo meant harder questions. Less margin for error. Lila nodded. Okay. The topic flashed on the screen. Immigration policies should be stricter. Her stomach dropped. She felt eyes on her before she even spoke. Begin, the judge said. Lila inhaled. Strict policies often ignore human cost. Pause, the judge interrupted. She stopped. Define your terms more clearly, he said. Be precise. She adjusted. Tried again. Stricter policies increase fear, not safety. Another pause. Your phrasing is vague, he said. Try again. Behind him, one judge scribbled. Another checked her phone. Lila's pulse thudded in her ears. She restarted a third time. This time, she got 2 full sentences out before a hand lifted. Let's hear from someone else, the judge said. She sat down slowly. Her notebook felt heavier now. After practice, scores were posted on the whiteboard. Not names. Numbers. Lila's score sat at the bottom. She stared at it. That doesn't make sense, a boy muttered nearby. She barely got to speak. Rules, someone else said, shrugging. Ms. Rivera approached the judge's table. Can I ask about the scoring? She said calmly. The center judge didn't look up. We're evaluating based on competitive readiness. And interruptions? She asked. He finally met her eyes. Debate is pressure, he said. Not everyone handles it. Lila stood a few steps behind her, silent. Ms. Rivera turned to her later in the hall. They are shifting standards, she said. Quietly. Lila exhaled. So it's not just me. No, Ms. Rivera said. But it is you they are testing. The next week, the rules were posted. New evaluation criteria. Clarity. Tone. Audience reception. Lila read the list twice. Tone. What does that even mean? She asked another team member. He shrugged. Means sound like them. At the first scrimmage, it became clear. One student stumbled through an argument, repeating himself, voice shaking. The judge smiled. Strong effort. Lila spoke next. Calm. Structured. Clear. The judge leaned forward. Can you slow down? He asked. Your delivery is intense. Intense. She slowed. Then he frowned. Now it feels rehearsed. She finished anyway. Scores came back. She lost by 2 points. 2 points labeled tone adjustment. After practice, a girl pulled Lila aside. They talk about you, she whispered. Lila stiffened. Who? The judges. They say you're hard to place. Place where? The girl hesitated. In the room. That night, Lila practiced in her mirror. She tried softening her voice. Flattening it. Rounding the edges. She sounded wrong. At the next match, she spoke naturally again. A judge raised an eyebrow. You're not taking feedback, he said afterward. I am, Lila replied. I just. He cut her off. Debate is about fitting standards, he said. Not challenging them. The room went quiet. Ms. Rivera stepped in. Actually, debate is. The judge smiled politely. We'll handle coaching. Lila felt something crack, slow and deep. At the next scoring meeting, the list went up. She wasn't last. She was 1 spot above it. Barely safe. Ms. Rivera found her sitting on the steps outside. They want you to quit, she said softly. Lila stared at the ground. I won't. Ms. Rivera nodded. Then they'll push harder. Inside the building, the judges laughed about something. Papers shuffled. Decisions made without her. A hand tapped Lila's shoulder. One of the judges stood there. You're improving, he said. But you should know, final selection is coming. Lila looked up. Selection for what? Who represents the school publicly? He smiled again. That same thin smile. Image matters, he added. And not every voice fits the brand. He walked away. Lila stayed seated long after the door closed. Her phone buzzed. A message from the team group chat. Next match streamed live. Mandatory participation. Live meant audience. Audience meant judgment beyond the room. Lila stood. If they wanted her to break in public, she wouldn't make it easy. But somewhere inside, she knew. They were done changing rules quietly. The auditorium lights were brighter than Lila expected. Too bright. They flattened everything. Faces. Shadows. Mistakes. She stood backstage, fingers curled around her note cards. The paper felt thin, like it could tear if she breathed wrong. Live in 30 seconds, someone whispered. Lila nodded. Her phone buzzed again. Messages stacked fast. You got this. Ignore them. Just sound confident. Sound. That word again. Ms. Rivera stepped close. Remember, she said quietly, you're not here to please them. Lila swallowed. They are the ones scoring. Ms. Rivera met her eyes. And history is watching. The announcer's voice boomed. Welcome to tonight's regional debate exhibition. Applause rolled out. Loud, polite, controlled. Lila walked on stage. The judges sat at a long table, hands folded, faces unreadable. The center judge adjusted his mic. Topic, he said, language requirements in public schools. Lila's chest tightened. She heard a whisper ripple through the crowd. That's her. The accent girl. She's brave. Brave felt like a warning. Speaker 1, the judge said. Lila stepped forward. She began steady. Clear. Language diversity reflects lived reality. A judge leaned toward his mic. Please keep your points concise. She nodded and continued. 2 sentences later, another interruption. Clarify your definition of diversity. She clarified. Another pause. Can you repeat that last line? She did. A murmur spread in the audience. Her opponent spoke next. Stumbled once. Corrected himself. The judges smiled. Good recovery, one said. When it was Lila's turn again, she felt the room lean in. She finished strong. She knew she did. The applause was uneven. Some clapped harder than others. The scores appeared on the screen behind the judges. She lost. By 1 point. The reason blinked beneath her name. Audience reception. Her hands trembled. Backstage, voices collided. That was unfair. They cut her off. She was clear. Lila sat down slowly. The center judge approached. You need to be mindful, he said. Live audiences react to tone. My tone? Lila asked. He smiled. It's just feedback. Ms. Rivera stepped between them. Feedback shouldn't erase substance. The judge's smile thinned. We're preparing students for the real world. Lila looked up. Is the real world always like this? The judge paused. Then, softly, for some people. The words followed her home. At dinner, her mother watched her closely. You didn't eat, she said. I'm fine, Lila replied. You always say that when you're not. Lila hesitated. Then, they say my voice makes people uncomfortable. Her mother set her fork down. Your voice carried you across oceans, she said. It will carry you through this. The next morning, a notice was posted. Closed judges review, mandatory attendance. Inside the room, the air felt tight. The judges sat closer than usual. This is about improvement, the center judge began. He clicked a remote. A video played. Clips of Lila speaking. Paused. Replayed. Here, he said, pointing. Your emphasis spikes. Another judge chimed in. It reads as confrontational. I'm emphasizing key points, Lila said carefully. Perception matters, the center judge replied. Not intention. Ms. Rivera crossed her arms. Then perception needs context. The judge ignored her. We've received concerns, he continued. From parents. Lila's stomach dropped. What concerns? That your presence is polarizing. Silence filled the room. One parent asked. The judge added, is this what our school represents? Lila felt heat rush to her face. Because of how I speak, she asked. Because of how people feel when you speak, he corrected. Ms. Rivera leaned forward. That's not an academic metric. The judge sighed. We're allowed discretion. The meeting ended without resolution. Outside, Lila found a flyer taped to her locker. Debate should sound professional. Someone had circled the word sound. She tore it down. Her phone buzzed. A link. A clip from the live stream. The comments scrolled fast. She's smart but hard to listen to. Why does she sound angry? Learn proper English. Her throat tightened. Ms. Rivera called that evening. They are moving toward removal, she said. From the public team. For what? Lila asked. For image. Lila stared at the ceiling. So if I stay? They'll say you're uncooperative. A long pause. Do you want to keep going? Ms. Rivera asked. Lila closed her eyes. She thought about the interruptions. The smiles. The quiet decisions. Yes, she said. But I won't shrink. The next day, a final notice appeared. Emergency board review, speaker eligibility. The date was circled in red. 3 days away. Lila folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her bag. They weren't just watching anymore. They were preparing to erase her. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and anxiety. Lila sat stiffly, notebook balanced on her lap. Ms. Rivera at her side, calm but tense. Across the table, 7 adults waited, eyes flicking between them like predators assessing prey. You've called this meeting for me? Lila asked. Yes, Ms. Rivera said softly. But stay composed. A man at the head of the table cleared his throat. Miss Hassan, your participation in the public debate team has raised concerns. Lila's fingers gripped the notebook harder. Concerns. That word was a shield for what she already knew. They didn't want her here because of how she sounded. Concerns about? She asked, voice steady. The woman next to him leaned forward. The way you speak. Your accent. Some parents have complained. Her stomach dropped. My accent. Lila repeated. I've followed every guideline, every rule. I've studied, prepared, and performed. Is my voice, my accent, against the rules? The man at the head smiled thinly. We are not targeting you personally. We must consider the team's public image. Lila's jaw tightened. Public image. So, clarity for adults matters more than content. More than facts. Silence. Ms. Rivera spoke up. Your arguments are strong, measurable, and on topic. Any suggestion otherwise is rooted in bias, not merit. One of the board members tilted his head. Bias? Really, Ms. Rivera? Or is it discomfort with something unfamiliar? The words hit Lila like cold water. She looked down, imagining the whispers, the glare of parents, the subtle tension in the judges' smiles during her last debate. Unfamiliar. That was the word they always used. A younger man scribbled on a notepad. We've documented audience reactions. Some viewers seemed distracted. Lila's pulse spiked. Distracted? Because they aren't used to hearing someone like me. The older woman raised a hand. Miss Hassan, we appreciate your talent. But perception is part of performance. It's not personal. Perception. Lila's voice cracked just slightly. Perception shouldn't erase preparation. It shouldn't erase work. Another member spoke, voice softer but firm. Miss Hassan, we must ensure the program aligns with expectations. Otherwise, the integrity of the competition is compromised. Lila felt the walls close in. Integrity. Expectations. Words meant to justify bias. Excuse me, she said, standing. The only thing compromised here is fairness. Nothing I did violated any rule. Nothing I said was inappropriate. And yet, every decision, every critique, is filtered through how I speak. A collective murmur went around the room. Some eyes flickered down, others hardened. The head man leaned back. You're passionate. We admire that. But the public team must appeal broadly. This is not about you as a person. It is about me as a person. Lila said, voice rising. Every time someone calls my accent unprofessional, they are saying I don't belong. Every interruption, every corrected line, they are not judging my argument, they are judging me. Silence. Sharp, heavy silence. One member cleared her throat. We're offering a compromise. We can assign you to practice rounds only. Lila's chest tightened. Practice rounds? Not the stage. So my voice is acceptable in private, but not visible to anyone outside your comfort zone. The room shifted. Lila could feel the power dynamic pressing down, an invisible weight she had to carry. Ms. Rivera's hand brushed hers. Keep control, she whispered. Lila took a slow breath. Then I refuse. I will not be relegated to practice rounds. If my participation is only welcome when it's convenient for you, then it isn't welcome at all. The head man's eyes narrowed. You understand, of course, that refusal could affect your eligibility. Yes, Lila said. I understand. And I accept that risk. The board members exchanged quiet words. Whispered measurements. Decisions in small movements. Lila felt the tension like static electricity on her skin. Very well, the head man said finally. We'll take a vote. All in favor of continuing Miss Hassan's participation on the public team. Hands raised, 5 out of 7. Lila's heart fluttered. Not unanimous. Not enough to stop the backlash, but enough to let her stand. The other two shook their heads. The silence that followed was louder than applause. You may continue, the head man said finally, voice tight. But we'll be monitoring closely. Lila nodded. Understood. Back outside the boardroom, the hallway felt narrower, every fluorescent light harsh on her skin. Students and staff passed, faces blurred, whispers trailing behind. Are you okay? Ms. Rivera asked. Lila smiled faintly. I'm alive. And I'm still speaking. She thought about the judge who'd critiqued her tone. About the flyer on her locker. About the comments online. The world wasn't ready for her voice, but she refused to hide it. The next debate loomed. Regional championships. The auditorium, larger than the last. More judges. More eyes. That night, Lila reviewed her notes at her desk. Every point polished, every argument honed. She spoke aloud, listening to her own accent, finding rhythm and strength in it. Her mother knocked softly. "Dinner." "I'll come down in a minute," Lila said. Alone again, she stared out the window at the streetlights. The city pulsed like judgment. Every light a witness. Every shadow a reminder. The doorbell rang. Lila's heart jumped. Who could it be at this hour? She opened the door. A package. No sender. Inside, a stack of envelopes, printed pages of debate transcripts. Highlighted notes. The handwriting was neat, almost clinical. A card slipped on top. "You are not wrong." "They are. Keep speaking." Her fingers trembled. She read it twice. Then 3 times. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a whisper, "They are watching." Every word, every syllable, every accent. But now she had proof. Notes. Evidence. Every interference, every coded critique recorded. The regional championship wasn't just a stage anymore. It was a battleground. And she was ready to fight. She set the envelopes aside and stared at her reflection in the window. Her hair framed her face like a halo. Her eyes, bright and sharp, reflected determination. She wouldn't back down. She wouldn't shrink. The phone buzzed. A message from an anonymous number. "We see you. Keep going. Don't falter." Lila swallowed, fingers tightening around her pen. "Not faltering," she whispered. "Never faltering." The shadows in the room seemed to lean closer. The next stage. The judges. The whispers. The emails. The flyers. She would face them all. And she would not break. The phone buzzed again. Another message. This one simpler. "Tomorrow. Prepare." Lila's chest tightened. Tomorrow. The championship stage. She closed her notebook. Rolled her shoulders. Took a deep breath. The world would hear her. Whether it liked it or not. And somewhere, unseen, someone in authority watched. Judging her. Testing her. Waiting for her to fail. But she wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. Her reflection stared back at her. And she smiled. Small. Fierce. Ready. The cliffhanger hung in the room like smoke. Tomorrow, everything would change. The auditorium smelled of polished wood and tension. Spotlights cut through the dark, slicing across the rows of chairs. Lila sat backstage, notebook on her lap, fingers tracing the edges. The hum of the audience murmured like distant thunder. Deep breaths, Ms. Rivera whispered. "Remember everything we practiced." "I'm ready," Lila said, though her chest felt heavy. Excitement tangled with anxiety, and the weight of every doubt cast at her pressed on her shoulders. The stage manager called names. One by one, the speakers approached the podium. Lila's turn was last. Every face she passed in the wings, a judge, a volunteer, another student, seemed to size her up. "Miss Hassan," a voice called. It was clipped, professional, but Lila caught the flicker of disdain underneath. The head judge stood, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. She squared her shoulders, her hair bouncing softly as she walked. The lights were bright, almost blinding, but she didn't falter. Her accent, once mocked in whispers and hallways, would now carry across the stage with every word carefully measured, every argument deliberate. "Good evening," she began, voice steady. The room quieted. "My topic is community accountability in public institutions." A man at the front shifted. "Your accent. Are you certain this is appropriate for such a formal setting?" Lila froze for a heartbeat, then straightened her spine. "The facts are independent of my voice," she said, words sharp, each syllable clear. "My argument stands on evidence, not familiarity." The murmur rose again, but she ignored it. Every eye was on her. Every expectation weighted her shoulders. She glanced at Ms. Rivera. A small nod. Lila inhaled, and the words flowed. Data, examples, historical context. She gestured subtly, accentuating points without distracting. Her voice rang in clarity, infused with passion. A judge scribbled notes. Another tapped a pen against the desk. Lila noted the glances exchanged, a flicker of surprise. Some leaned in, attentive. Some still skeptical because her voice didn't fit their comfort zone. Midway through, a whisper floated from the audience. "Can she really?" She caught it. Eyes narrowing, she smiled faintly. "Yes, I can. And I will." Her argument built. Evidence laid upon evidence. Logic intertwined with emotion. The auditorium seemed to lean forward with her, drawn into the rhythm she set. Then came the critical moment, the rebuttal round. Her opponent, a polished speaker with the perfect cadence, smirked subtly. Miss Hassan, your points are interesting, but I think the audience struggles to follow your argument. Lila's pulse hammered. Every microaggression, every coded insult she'd endured flashed in her mind. She forced her hands to still, held the podium like a shield. Interesting, she said, voice controlled, eyes locking on the judge in the front row. Interesting is subjective. Clarity is measurable. Allow me to clarify my argument further. Every eye followed her. Every word hit harder than before. The rhythm of her speech, once criticized, now commanded attention. She pivoted seamlessly, rebutting points with precision, dismantling assumptions silently baked into the critiques. A judge whispered to another, "She's compelling." Lila's chest tightened, satisfaction mixing with tension. She knew the battle wasn't won yet. This stage was a proving ground, but exposure brought risk. Every pause in her speech was a test, every silence, a trap. Halfway through her closing, a text buzzed on her phone. She ignored it, focus absolute. Afterward, in the wings, Ms. Rivera handed her the phone. The screen displayed a message. "Keep going. They are watching. But you're stronger than they think." Lila exhaled, fingers gripping the edges of the phone. Even behind the anonymous encouragement, the truth pressed in. Someone was monitoring her every move, anticipating a mistake, hoping for her to falter. Back on stage, she finished. Her final words, steady and deliberate. Justice isn't about comfort. It's about accountability. And we all bear that responsibility. A beat of silence. Then the applause. Sparse at first, then swelling. The faces of judges softened. The murmur of approval spread. Lila stepped back, chest rising and falling, pulse echoing the intensity of every moment she had lived to reach here. Offstage, her competitor offered a nod, half respect, half surprise. Lila nodded in return. She didn't smile yet, not until the final tally, but acknowledgement of her presence felt like a small victory. The head judge cleared his throat. "Miss Hassan, exceptional performance. One of the most thorough arguments we've witnessed today." Lila's fingers trembled. Every microaggression, every biased remark, every whisper about her voice, she had faced them all. And today, they had not broken her. But celebration was muted. Not everyone clapped. Not everyone nodded. Not everyone acknowledged the invisible weight of bias she carried every step. Later, backstage, she reviewed notes and feedback. Praise mingled with subtle digs, phrases like "needs clearer articulation" or "audience might struggle with delivery." Each one a coded reminder. Perception mattered more than substance. A journalist approached, recorder in hand. "Miss Hassan, can you tell us about your preparation?" "I practiced," Lila said, soft but firm. "And I relied on facts, not opinion. My voice is part of who I am, and it shouldn't diminish what I contribute." The reporter scribbled quickly. Her words would be quoted, misquoted, twisted, but she didn't care. She had spoken truth. Even in the backstage clutter, whispers of bias continued. A parent muttered, "She shouldn't be here." Another student, eyes wide, said quietly, "I've never heard someone like her speak like that." Lila's mind ran through every subtle judgment she'd faced, every sneer, every remark. And yet, she held herself tall. Every tension, every threat, every consequence, the systemic bias she fought, was visible, palpable. And now, it was documented, observed, and resisted. Ms. Rivera placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did well. But tomorrow, the board will review every stage. They'll dissect every word. Stay alert." Lila nodded. The reality of institutional oversight pressed down. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Every critique, every whisper, every biased comment could still jeopardize her position. She returned to her hotel room, reviewing speeches, analyzing feedback, preparing for the final argument. Her reflection in the mirror stared back, a black teenage girl, 16 years old, eyes sharp, jaw set, hair framing her face. Resilience and tension wrapped together in a single expression. A knock on the door. Another envelope slid under. Inside, a note. "Evidence is with you. They cannot erase what you've shown. But remain careful." Lila's heart raced. Someone, anonymous, vigilant, was tracking the bias, the microaggressions, the threats. Tomorrow, the final round, the highest stakes. She gathered the envelopes, notes, and her notebook. The weight of responsibility settled like armor on her shoulders. Every argument, every word, every pause was deliberate. And in the quiet, she whispered, "They can watch. They can judge. But they will not silence me. The clock ticked. Shadows stretched across the room. The stage, the judges, the whispers, everything waited. Tomorrow, Lila Hassan would speak again. And this time, it would be impossible to ignore her. The cliffhanger lingered in the air like smoke. Would the biases crumble under the weight of her preparation, her poise, her undeniable talent? Oh! Morning light filtered through the blinds of Lila's hotel room, painting stripes across the floor. She sat on the edge of the bed, notebook open, reviewing every argument, every citation, every counterpoint. Her hand hovered over a page before tapping the pen nervously. "Focus," she whispered to herself. "Every word matters. Every pause matters." The hallway outside hummed with the chatter of other competitors. Each voice a reminder of what was at stake, not just winning, but proving herself in a space designed to doubt her. Her accent, her youth, her skin, they all carried weight. Every microaggression she'd faced felt amplified under the scrutiny of this stage. Ms. Rivera knocked lightly and entered, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Breakfast is ready. We need to leave in 15. Lila closed the notebook and stood, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready," she said. The words sounded more like a question than a declaration. On the bus to the venue, tension wound around her like steel coils. She watched the city blur by, thinking of every hallway sneer, every whispered doubt, every judge who had questioned her presence in the debate halls before. Today, the spotlight would be harsher, the stakes higher. The microcosm of bias she faced daily would be amplified for the final round. Backstage, the air smelled of polished wood and caffeine. Competitors adjusted their notes, whispered strategies, and practiced gestures. Lila found her corner, opened her notebook, and reviewed the rebuttals. Her fingers traced the words as if touching the arguments would make them stronger. A stage assistant appeared, clipboard in hand. "Miss Hassan, 5 minutes to go. Please prepare to take the podium." Lila's stomach tightened. 5 minutes. Enough time to calm herself, or enough to panic. She closed her eyes, letting the rehearsed lines settle, letting the rhythm of her voice anchor her. The stage manager called names, one by one. Each competitor walked the spotlight, their voices confident, their points precise. And then, the call. "Miss Hassan, you're up." She stood, notebook tucked under her arm, steps measured, shoulders squared. Every whisper behind her felt like a shadow of doubt. Every glance from the judges carried an unspoken question. Could she rise above their expectations? Could she command the room, despite the bias quietly simmering beneath polished professionalism? At the podium, the lights hit her full on, and the audience blurred into a soft, indistinct wave. She inhaled and began. "Good morning. Today, we examine accountability in public institutions. Evidence shows systemic gaps. Data proves patterns. And those patterns have real consequences, real lives affected by inaction." A judge, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a clipped tone, interrupted mid-sentence. "Miss Hassan, can you simplify your points? Your delivery, it's unusual. Hard to follow." The words struck. Her heart jumped, but she held her stance, gripping the edges of the podium. Every ounce of training, every late-night practice session, every whispered insult she had endured. This was why she had to remain unshakable. "Unusual is subjective," she said. "The content, however, is objective. Let me clarify my argument with precision." A hush settled. Even the competitor beside her seemed momentarily still, waiting to see if she would falter. But Lila didn't. Words poured with clarity and confidence. She emphasized evidence, personal anecdotes, and the human cost of systemic bias. Every point was deliberate, every gesture measured. Her accent, once a source of ridicule, became the vessel of undeniable truth. Halfway through, a subtle sneer came from the front row. Lila froze for a heartbeat, recognizing the familiar pattern of doubt masked as critique. But she pivoted seamlessly, acknowledging the judge's comment without letting it derail her momentum. "You question my voice," she said, tone calm yet pointed. "But these words are backed by research, testimony, and experience. If clarity is your concern, let my points demonstrate substance over style." The audience leaned forward, the whispers fading. Her words carried weight now, each syllable a declaration that the bias they held had no bearing on the merit of her arguments. The rebuttal round began. Her competitor launched a critique, fast, polished, rehearsed, but Lila anticipated each move. She countered with sharp, concise logic, dismantling assumptions and calling out hidden biases subtly, without overt accusation. Every objection met with poise. Every doubt answered with evidence. A judge whispered to another, "She's formidable." Lila felt a surge of energy, but kept focus. The room was still a minefield of microaggressions and subtle intimidation. A slip, a mispronounced word, a faltering gesture, any could be seized as justification to diminish her effort. She couldn't falter, not now, not ever. By the final segment, sweat prickled her palms, but her voice remained steady. "Justice," she said, eyes scanning the room, "is not about comfort. It's about accountability. Every institution, every individual has a role. We cannot ignore patterns, and we cannot excuse inaction." A pause. A long, tense silence. Then, soft claps, building into robust applause. Some judges nodded, others stared, some still skeptical but undeniably affected. Backstage, Ms. Rivera hugged her tightly. "You owned it," she whispered. "Every word. Every pause. You were unstoppable." Lila's phone buzzed. A text from an anonymous supporter. They saw. "They cannot erase your truth. Keep standing." She exhaled slowly, the tension easing slightly. Victory felt close, yet fragile. She had navigated bias, microaggressions, and institutional doubt, but the final decision still hung over her like storm clouds. In the quiet moments, she replayed the whispers, the clipped comments, the subtle doubts, the skeptical glances. Each one a reminder that systemic bias wasn't eradicated by a single performance. She had triumphed in this battle, but the war was ongoing. Later, during feedback, she encountered mixed reactions. Praise mingled with subtle digs, delivery could be clearer, arguments sometimes abstract, audience engagement varies. Each phrase a coded reflection of expectations tinted by preconceptions. A fellow competitor leaned in. "You really shut them down. I didn't think anyone could do that with such poise." Lila managed a small, tight smile. "It's not about shutting down, it's about speaking the truth," she said. Even the journalists noted it. Miss Hassan's arguments were compelling, despite a hesitation, despite challenges some may have perceived in her style. She knew what they meant. Style, voice, presence, all filtered through a lens of bias. Yet her message landed. Her voice carried. Her argument held. That night, in her hotel room, she reviewed her notes for the final round. Every microaggression, every subtle bias, every pressure point became data. Every reaction a reminder. The final stage wasn't just a contest of skill, but a test of endurance under scrutiny. She sat by the window, city lights flickering like distant stars, reflecting in her determined eyes. Shadows stretched across the room, but she felt a sense of clarity. She had been prepared, she had confronted bias directly, and she had risen. A knock on the door. A small envelope slid under. Inside, a single note. "Tomorrow is the moment. Stand firm. Speak your truth. Justice will follow." Lila held it in her hands. The weight of expectation, bias, and opportunity pressed upon her. Tomorrow, the final round, the most visible stage, awaited. Every glance, every word, every judgment would be amplified. But she was ready. She whispered to herself, "They can watch. They can judge. They cannot break me." The cliffhanger hung heavy. Would the final round cement her victory or challenge her under even greater scrutiny? Only the next day would reveal the answer. The debate hall was alive with tension. Bright stage lights sliced through the dim auditorium, casting long shadows on the polished wood floors. Every seat was filled, students, teachers, judges, parents, each pair of eyes a lens of expectation, skepticism, or doubt. Lila stood behind the podium, fingers grazing the edges, notebook tucked neatly to her side. Her heart thumped, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Every whispered insult, every clipped comment, every subtle dismissal had built to this night. She had rehearsed, planned, and visualized every argument, but no rehearsal could fully prepare her for the scrutiny she now faced. The first speaker, a seasoned competitor with a sharp, practiced delivery, finished with precision, confident in their diction, calm in their composure. A smattering of polite applause followed, but the tension in the room only deepened. Lila exhaled slowly, letting the applause wash over her, reminding herself, this was her stage too. The moderator's voice rang clear. "Miss Hassan, your final rebuttal." She stepped forward, notebook clutched tightly. Every eye on her, every expectation, every hidden bias waiting to pounce. She inhaled deeply, letting the silence wrap around her like armor. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm but firm. Tonight, we discuss accountability, not as an abstract concept, but as a principle that governs real lives. Lives affected by inaction, by oversight, by bias. A judge, leaning forward with an impassive expression, interrupted sharply. Your delivery is different. Hard to follow. Lila's stomach tightened for a heartbeat, but she straightened. Perspective is subjective, she said evenly. But facts are objective. She launched into her argument, each sentence deliberate, each gesture measured. She exposed systemic flaws in public institutions, citing examples and statistics without sounding rehearsed. Her accent, once a source of ridicule, now carried authority, clarity, and authenticity. The subtle smirks she had faced before were nowhere to be seen. Instead, eyes sharpened, leaning in to catch every word. Her competitor attempted to interject, voice sharp and cutting. Lila held up her hand, a signal not of arrogance but of control. Let me finish, she said softly but unyielding. The room held its breath. She continued, threading emotion into facts, human stories into policy failures. Every microaggression she had endured earlier in her life became fuel for her calm defiance. Halfway through, the tension shifted. A parent in the audience whispered to another, eyebrows raised, clearly impressed. Even some judges exchanged glances, recognizing the precision, poise, and depth in Lila's argument. Then came the subtle challenge, the judge's clipped comment, "Your style is unusual, perhaps too informal for the weight of your topic." She paused, letting the words sink, not as criticism but as acknowledgement of bias. Her hand brushed the podium, and she spoke again, voice steady. Style is not substance. Substance is the truth, and truth does not conform to prejudice. The clarity of evidence and human experience transcends expectations of conformity. A murmur ran through the hall. Competitors shifted, some intimidated, some impressed. She could feel the energy change, the weight of skepticism lifting slightly, replaced with attention, even admiration. During the final question round, a judge asked, "How do you address critics who say your examples are anecdotal, not systemic?" Lila's gaze swept the room, meeting each skeptical eye, before returning to the judge. Every anecdote is a microcosm of systemic failure. One voice ignored becomes many voices silenced. Ignoring individual experiences is how systems perpetuate bias and injustice. Data is important, but human consequence is irreplaceable. The room held its collective breath. Another judge's lips pressed tightly, clearly uncomfortable, but no interjection came. She had held the room, commanded attention, and transformed skepticism into reflection. Backstage, Ms. Rivera whispered, "You're changing minds. Keep it steady." Lila nodded, her mind racing with one thought. Victory wasn't just winning the debate. It was proving that she, her ideas, and her voice mattered despite bias. The final moments arrived. The moderator called for closing statements. Lila lifted her head, shoulders squared, voice clear. Justice requires not only recognition of wrongdoing, but action to correct it. Silence and inaction are complicity. Today, we have an opportunity to acknowledge patterns, to confront bias, and to implement change. This is not just a debate, it is a commitment to integrity, accountability, and respect for every individual affected by systemic oversight. A beat of silence. Then, applause. The room erupted, not just polite claps, but genuine acknowledgement of the weight, precision, and courage in her words. The competitor nodded, a silent recognition of the battle fought and lost fairly. But the tension wasn't entirely gone. Lila knew the judge's decisions were still pending, and subtle bias could still sway outcomes. She felt a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. Every glance, every note, every expression from authority figures was being processed, analyzed, weighed. Later, in the green room, she replayed the moment in her head. Every slight interruption, every whispered doubt, every pause had been navigated. Her hands still trembled slightly, though her posture remained upright. This wasn't just about her performance. It was about the subtle, pervasive judgment she faced as a black teenage girl in spaces designed to question her presence. The envelope with the final scores was handed to the moderator. Lila held her breath as he unfolded it. Her score, the highest in the competition. Cheers erupted from her corner. Ms. Rivera hugged her, whispering, "You did it. You turned every doubt into proof. Every whisper into validation." Lila's eyes welled up, but she blinked quickly, letting pride and relief mingle. She remembered every insult, every doubting look, every sneer and whispered critique that had come before. Tonight, Those doubts had been silenced by clarity, poise, and unyielding truth. Yet, even in victory, a subtle awareness lingered. Systemic bias didn't disappear overnight. There would be other stages, other challenges, other judgments. But tonight, she had turned the tables. Tonight, she had spoken, and the world had listened. Later, in the quiet of her hotel room, she opened her notebook, tracing the words she had written and spoken. The city lights reflected in her eyes, bright and unwavering. She whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." And beyond the window, the night stretched, alive with possibilities and uncharted battles. But Lila Hassan, 16, resolute, and unstoppable, had found her voice. The chapter closed not with relief, but with anticipation. The final judgment had come, but the consequences of exposure, recognition, and the validation of her truth would ripple far beyond this stage. A single notification pinged on her phone. It was a text from an advocate who had followed her journey. "You've shown them. Keep speaking. Keep fighting. We see you." Lila read it twice, letting the words sink. This was no longer about a debate. It was about every unseen, unheard voice she represented, every bias confronted, every microaggression endured. She leaned back, notebook closed, eyes on the horizon of city lights. Her voice had mattered. Her story had mattered. And the fight, for recognition, for justice, for equality, was far from over. Tonight, she slept knowing she had claimed more than a trophy. She had claimed dignity. She had claimed visibility. And most importantly, she had claimed her truth. Morning light filtered through the blinds of Lila's hotel room, soft and golden, yet carrying the weight of anticipation. Today was the awards ceremony, the final declaration of victory, the public acknowledgement of every late night, every whispered doubt, every subtle dismissal she had endured. Her hands shook slightly as she smoothed the blazer over her shoulders. It wasn't just clothing. It was armor, carefully chosen to project confidence while remaining true to herself. She glanced at her reflection. Hair neatly coiled, eyes bright with determination, posture upright and unyielding. The reflection staring back wasn't just a teenage girl, it was every voice she had carried, every microaggression she had transformed into fuel, every subtle act of bias she had survived. She exhaled slowly, centering herself. The auditorium buzzed with conversation, excitement, and nervous energy. Judges, competitors, families, and teachers all milled about. Lila felt the familiar tension in her chest, a mix of nerves, pride, and lingering anxiety. She reminded herself, this was the culmination, but also the beginning of a larger journey. The ceremony began. The host's voice echoed through the hall, crisp and formal. Names were read, certificates handed out, applause filling the space with polite recognition. Then came the announcement of the top debater, the debate champion. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host began, "our highest honor this year goes to Lila Hassan." Time seemed to slow. Applause erupted, the sound swelling, filling the space around her. Her stomach tightened, her throat raw, but her heart soared. She walked to the stage, each step deliberate, carrying not just her notebook, not just her notes, but the weight of every injustice she had faced. The trophy was handed to her, sleek, shining, almost too bright for the weight of the moment. She held it carefully, fingers curling around the base, eyes scanning the room. Faces in the audience blurred slightly. She focused instead on the judges, on Ms. Rivera, on the advocates who had quietly supported her. This was validation, but also proof. Every subtle insult, every dismissive glance, every whispered critique had not defined her. After the applause, the ceremony transitioned into interviews. A journalist approached, microphone poised. "Lila, your performance tonight was remarkable. How did you stay so composed under pressure?" She smiled softly, voice steady but warm. "It wasn't just me. It's the people who weren't given a voice, the stories that were overlooked. I speak for them. I've learned that composure isn't about ignoring fear, it's about channeling it into truth." Another reporter leaned in, curious. "Your accent, some said it might be a barrier, but you turned it into a strength. How?" Lila's gaze met the camera lens, unwavering. "Identity isn't a weakness. It's perspective. The very thing they tried to dismiss me for is what made my words authentic. Truth transcends accent, color, or expectation." Behind the microphones and cameras, she noticed the subtle shift in the audience. Parents who had whispered doubt were nodding. Competitors who had once smirked looked thoughtful, introspective. Judges exchanged glances, some silently acknowledging that their own biases had been challenged. Backstage, Ms. Rivera hugged her tightly. You've done more than win a debate. You've changed minds. And that's bigger than any trophy. Lila felt the weight of those words. She had always known the fight was larger than competitions, larger than applause. It was about justice, recognition, and breaking cycles of subtle discrimination. Later, at the press table, a question arose that made her heart pause. There's been talk about microaggressions and bias in judging panels nationwide. How does this victory impact those systemic issues? Lila took a deep breath. Her eyes swept the room, connecting with individuals in the audience who had been overlooked before, whose voices had been silenced. This isn't just about one victory. It's about visibility. It's about confronting subtle bias, exposing what goes unspoken, and showing that integrity and truth cannot be overshadowed by prejudice. Change begins with acknowledgement. Tonight proves that excellence cannot be ignored, no matter who it comes from. Her words reverberated. Cameras clicked, notebooks scribbled, and whispers circulated. She felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes when hard work meets acknowledgement, when injustice is countered with undeniable proof. That evening, back in her hotel room, the trophy resting on the desk, Lila reflected. It wasn't just a symbol of victory. It was a reminder of resilience, of every small fight that led to this moment. She thought of hallway whispers, skeptical judges, subtle biases that tried to undermine her voice. Every challenge had been met not with anger alone, but with preparation, intelligence, and courage. Her phone buzzed. A message from her debate mentor lit the screen. You've shown them what truth and perseverance look like. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. She smiled, fingers lingering over the screen. She remembered moments of self-doubt, the nights she had cried over harsh comments, the isolation of feeling misunderstood. Now, all of it seemed to converge into clarity, the clarity of triumph earned through integrity, not just skill. The next day, the story of Lila's victory appeared online. Headlines highlighted her courage, her resilience, and her eloquence. Some articles subtly acknowledged the biases she had faced, others focused on her brilliance and composure. Both truths were valid, intertwined, undeniable. Even as accolades rolled in, Lila felt a quiet tug of awareness. She knew this didn't erase the structural inequities, the silent prejudices that existed beyond the spotlight. But she had lit a spark. One voice amplified could reach many. One example of justice and visibility could challenge assumptions far beyond a single auditorium. Weeks later, she returned to school. Hallways that once whispered doubt now echoed curiosity and respect. Fellow students approached her, some with admiration, some with hesitant acknowledgement, but all attentive. Lila navigated the halls with the same grace and poise she had learned to carry, her smile steady but thoughtful. At debate club practice, she shared insights, strategies, and encouragement with her peers. She emphasized preparation, voice, and courage, the very tools that had turned bias into validation. Ms. Rivera watched from the side, eyes misty but proud. One afternoon, Lila received a letter from the National Debate Association. The letter acknowledged systemic disparities in judging panels and committed to reforms. They cited her performance as an example of why diversity, equity, and representation were crucial. Lila held the letter carefully, exhaling with a mix of relief and vindication. Her voice had catalyzed change, incremental, but tangible. That night, she placed the trophy beside her notebook, opened a fresh page, and began writing. Not about debates, but about the lessons learned, the injustices witnessed, and the stories yet to be told. Her pen moved with purpose, tracing words that carried both triumph and awareness of ongoing struggles. Lila Hassan had won the debate championship. But more importantly, she had exposed bias, challenged authority, and turned every microaggression into a testament of resilience. She understood the cost of recognition, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the emotional toll, but also the power of persistence. Looking out the window, city lights flickering like distant stars, she whispered softly to herself, "This is not the end. It's just the beginning." And with that, Lila closed her notebook, the trophy gleaming beside her, and allowed herself a rare moment of quiet pride. Justice had been served in its own measured way. Her voice had been heard. Her story had been validated. And in that validation lay a promise that every subtle act of bias could one day be met with clarity, courage, and undeniable truth. The chapter, and her journey, ended not with simple relief, but with profound recognition of both victory and responsibility.